My name is Sophia Reyes, and in my family, I'm apparently what you'd call a gold digger. At least that's what my brother Jason decided to tell everyone at my cousin's wedding last spring. I still remember standing near the dessert table, champagne, flute in hand, when I overheard him telling our Aunt Melissa. Yeah, Sophia's always been good at finding guys with deep pockets. It's like she's got a sixth sense for wealth. I froze, the chocolate-dipped strawberry halfway to my mouth, as, he continued, her new boyfriend Michael. Trust me, she researched his family before their first date. The guy's parents own property in 3 states. The worst part wasn't even the lie itself. It was how everyone nodded along. Like this was common knowledge about me. Little did Jason know that while he was spreading these rumors, I was the one keeping his financial life from completely imploding. For the past 8 months, I'd been anonymously paying off his massive credit card debt, using money from my own savings and year-end bonus. The same brother who mockingly called me Miss Wall Street whenever I talked about my financial consulting job had no idea that without my help, he'd probably be facing bankruptcy at 34. I stood there, my face burning with humiliation, but decided not to confront him. Not yet. Instead, I made a decision. I would let him continue his performance at our mother's upcoming 60th birthday dinner. Let him really commit to this narrative about me, and then I would show the receipts. Literally, sometimes I wonder how we ended up here. Jason and I grew up in the same house with the same parents, yet somehow I became the family villain for working hard and being financially responsible, while he became the lovable screw-up who could do no wrong, despite a decade of poor decisions. Our parents always expected more from me, while making endless excuses for him. Jason's just finding his path, they'd say, as he dropped out of another program or quit another job. Meanwhile, I was expected to achieve perfect grades, help with chores, and never complain. Even now, at 32, with a successful career I built from nothing, I'm still fighting against the family narrative that Jason is just misunderstood, and I'm somehow taking advantage of people. The irony that I've been secretly preventing his financial ruin, while he paints me as a gold digger, isn't lost on me. So yes, I decided to wait until Mom's birthday dinner, where our entire extended family would be gathered, including my boyfriend, Michael. I would let Jason dig his hole as deep as he wanted, and then I would hand him the shovel receipts. All $27,340 worth. Maybe that makes me petty, but after a lifetime of this treatment, I needed the truth to come out in a way no one could ignore or dismiss. And honestly, I needed to see his face when he realized that the sister he'd been publicly ridiculing had been privately saving him. I grew up in a modest middle-class neighborhood on the northwest side of Chicago, where my parents worked hard to give us a comfortable life. Dad was an electrical engineer at a manufacturing company, and Mom taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. From the outside, we probably looked like the perfect American family. Hard-working parents, 2 kids, a dog named Rusty, and a well-maintained split-level home with a basketball hoop in the driveway. But inside those walls, there was an unmistakable imbalance in how Jason and I were treated. I was 3 years younger than Jason, but you wouldn't know it from the expectations placed on us. By the time I was 12, I was cooking dinner twice a week and maintaining straight A's, while Jason, at 15, was still being reminded to make his bed and praised effusively for C+ grades. Your brother's mind works differently, Mom would explain when I questioned the double standard. He's creative, not academic like you. This pattern continued throughout high school. Jason was on the basketball team, but rarely played. Still, my parents attended every game. When I made the debate team and went to state finals, my dad couldn't make it because of an important meeting at work. I remember the night before, leaving for college, finding Mom in Jason's room, helping him organize his desk for his senior year of high school. Make sure you help him with his college applications, she told me. You know how these things come easily to you. And I did help him. I proofread his essays, researched scholarships, and even drove him to his campus tours. When I got my acceptance letter to Northwestern, with a partial scholarship, there was a quiet dinner at home to celebrate. When Jason got into community college, 2 years later, my parents threw a backyard barbecue and invited the extended family. After high school, I worked 3 jobs during my undergraduate years. Morning shifts at a coffee shop, weekend receptionist at a salon, and night hours in the university library. I lived on ramen noodles and free campus events, calculating every expense down to the penny, to make sure my scholarship and earnings covered tuition and expenses. Meanwhile, Jason dropped out of community college after 1 semester, declaring it too restrictive for his entrepreneurial spirit. Instead of insisting he get a job, my parents paid his rent in a shared apartment and gave him startup capital for various business ideas that never materialized. When I graduated with honors in finance, I landed an entry-level position at a respected consulting firm in Chicago. The starting salary wasn't impressive, but the growth potential was. I worked 70-hour weeks, took on the clients no one else wanted, and volunteered for every professional development opportunity. I shared a cramped apartment with 2 roommates to save money and focused on building my financial foundation. By contrast, Jason spent his 20s finding himself. He worked briefly as a bartender, then tried his hand at music production, followed by a stint selling protein supplements via a multi-level marketing scheme. Each venture began with enthusiasm and promises of imminent success, followed inevitably by reasons why the industry was rigged. The partners weren't committed enough, or the market wasn't ready for his vision. Through it all, our parents provided a safety net that I never had, covering his car payments when he was between opportunities, lending him money for security deposits on new apartments after being evicted from previous ones, even co-signing loans I later discovered they ended up paying off. Jason's a dreamer, Dad would say proudly. He's just like my brother Tom was at that age. And look how well Tom turned out. Uncle Tom, who eventually found stability in his 40s after 2 bankruptcies, was apparently the model for Jason's path. When I pointed out that perhaps Jason needed more structure and accountability, Mom would sigh and say, "Not everyone can be as naturally disciplined as you, Sophia," as if my discipline was some inborn trait, rather than a daily choice, made out of necessity. Despite the frustration, I maintained my relationship with my family. I'd come for Sunday dinners when my schedule allowed, send thoughtful gifts for birthdays and holidays, and listen patiently to updates about Jason's latest venture, while my own achievements were acknowledged with passing interest at best. "That's nice, honey," Mom would say when I mentioned a promotion, before turning to Dad with, "Oh, did you tell Sophia about Jason's new podcast idea? It's going to revolutionize the self-help industry." I'd sit there, nodding and smiling, while internally wondering if they even remembered what my job title was. Don't get me wrong, my parents loved me. They just couldn't see the inequity in how they treated us, how they celebrated Jason's potential, while overlooking my actual accomplishments. And for years, I accepted this dynamic. I told myself that it didn't matter, that I was doing well, regardless of their validation, that maybe they gave Jason more attention because they worried about him more. I convinced myself that someday they would see all that I had achieved and be equally proud. In retrospect, I was setting myself up for continued disappointment while enabling the very dynamics that hurt me. The first time Jason showed outright jealousy was when I bought my condo at 27, after years of careful saving, maxing out my 401k match, and 3 promotions. I'd finally accumulated enough for a down payment on a small but modern 1-bedroom in Wickers Park. It wasn't luxurious, 970 square feet with a galley kitchen and a view of the neighboring building's brick wall, but it was mine, and I was incredibly proud. I invited my family over for a small housewarming dinner, spending the day preparing my grandmother's lasagna recipe and arranging fresh flowers on my new dining table. Mom and Dad arrived with a houseplant and a bottle of wine, appropriately impressed as I showed them around. "It's small, but it's nice," Mom said, which from her was high praise. Then Jason arrived, 45 minutes late, empty-handed except for a 6-pack of beer with 2 bottles missing. He walked through my front door, glanced around with an expression I couldn't quite read, and said, "Pretty fancy for someone your age. Must be nice having a boss who likes you so much." The emphasis he put on likes made his implication clear. Dad laughed uncomfortably, while Mom busied herself arranging the flowers. "I saved for 5 years for the down payment, Jason," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "And I got a great interest rate." He smirked, taking a beer from his depleted six-pack. "Yeah, I'm sure your personal banker was real interested in helping you out." He made air quotes around interested, then winked at our father as if they shared a private joke. Dad didn't correct him. Instead, he changed the subject to the building's amenities, while I stood there, my moment of pride dissolving into a familiar discomfort. That night set the pattern. When I bought a new car the following year, not a luxury brand, just a reliable Toyota to replace my college clunker, Jason asked loudly at family dinner if my sugar daddy had picked out the color when I carried a designer handbag I'd saved 3 months to purchase. He questioned whether it was authentic or if I had connections for discounted merchandise. Each time, my parents would redirect the conversation or dismiss his comments with, "That's just Jason being Jason," as if his behavior was a lovable quirk rather than deliberate cruelty. During a family vacation to Michigan, Jason rolled his eyes when I mentioned an upcoming business trip to San Francisco. "Another business trip, huh? Funny how your conferences are always in nice locations." The air quotes he used around business trip made several relatives glance at me speculatively. What hurt most wasn't even the insinuation, but how easily our family seemed to accept his narrative. No one pointed out that consulting involves travel, or that I had worked incredibly hard for my position. Instead, our cousin Elaine asked if I was seeing anyone special in San Francisco, with a knowing look that made my stomach turn. Through it all, I kept hoping Jason would mature, that he'd work through whatever issues made him lash out at me. I made excuses for him in my mind. Perhaps he felt insecure about his own lack of stability. Maybe he was still finding his way. Possibly our parents' different treatment had affected him too. Then, about 18 months ago, Jason lost both his job and his apartment within the same month. He had been working as a sales representative for a local brewery, his longest-held position at nearly 8 months, when the company downsized. His roommate had apparently moved out without warning, leaving Jason unable to cover the full rent. Rather than let him sleep on our parents' couch, which would have been his 4th time moving back home, I offered him my guest room temporarily. "Just until you find your feet," I said, helping him carry boxes of belongings into my spare bedroom. "I appreciate this, Soph," he said. And for a moment, he sounded like the brother I remembered from childhood, the one who taught me to ride a bike and defended me from neighborhood bullies. "I won't be in your hair long." Living together rekindled glimmers of our old relationship. We'd occasionally cook dinner together, laughing at shared memories and inside jokes from our youth. He'd make coffee some mornings before I left for work, and I'd leave post-it notes with encouraging messages before his job interviews. There were moments I thought we might finally build a healthy adult-sibling relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than competition. Still, there were signs of tension. Jason would make passing comments about my fancy coffee machine or how I was living large, despite my moderate lifestyle. He'd sometimes invite friends over without asking, leaving my living room strewn with empty beer bottles and pizza boxes. When I mentioned these issues, he'd become defensive. "Sorry we're not all neat freaks with corporate jobs," or "must be nice to worry about coaster rings on your coffee table instead of how to make rent." Each time I'd back down, not wanting to seem unwelcoming or unsympathetic to his situation. I told myself things would improve once he found stable employment, that his occasional bitterness was just a product of his current circumstances. Despite the challenges, I cherish those rare good moments, watching movies together on rainy Sundays, reminiscing about childhood camping trips, or the night we stayed up until 2 a.m., attempting to master our grandmother's secret cookie recipe. In those moments, I could almost believe we were rebuilding our bond, that we might eventually support each other as equals. I wanted so badly to believe Jason could change, that our relationship could heal. Looking back, I was setting myself up for disappointment again, making the same mistake I'd made with our parents, hoping that if I just gave enough, understood enough, forgave enough, eventually I would receive the same in return. I couldn't yet see that the dynamics were too deeply entrenched, that without honest confrontation and boundaries, nothing would truly change. The discovery happened about 7 months into Jason's stay with me. I was cleaning the apartment one Saturday, while he was out at a friend's place, straightening up the living room, when I noticed several official-looking envelopes sticking out from under the couch. I assumed they'd fallen from the coffee table and bent to retrieve them. The bold red final notice, stamped across one envelope, caught my attention immediately. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the addressee was clearly visible. Jason Reyes, at my address. Something cold settled in my stomach. I placed the envelopes on the kitchen counter, trying to respect his privacy, while wrestling with my concern. When Jason returned that evening, I calmly mentioned finding some mail that looked important. "Oh yeah, just some junk mail about credit card offers," he said dismissively, stuffing the envelopes into his backpack without meeting my eyes. "Nothing to worry about." His reaction only heightened my concern. That night, after Jason had gone to bed, I sat at my kitchen table, wrestling with my conscience. As a financial consultant, I recognized the signs of serious money troubles. But, as a sister, I wasn't sure how or if I should intervene. The next day, while doing laundry, I found another notice that had apparently fallen from his pants pocket. This one clearly indicated an account in collections. My professional training kicked in. Overriding my hesitation, I needed to understand the situation to know if I could help, or if I needed to protect myself from potential fallout. Over the next week, I pieced together the extent of Jason's financial crisis through discarded mail, overheard phone conversations, and notifications that arrived at my address. The picture that emerged was alarming. Jason had 6 credit cards, all maxed out to their limits of between $5,000 and $12,000 each, totaling nearly $40,000 in high-interest debt. He had missed payments on most of them for several months. Additionally, he had unpaid medical bills from an emergency room visit the previous year, and student loans from his brief college stint had gone into default. 3 of his accounts had already been sent to collection agencies. All this while, he was working part-time at a local bar, making barely enough to cover his phone bill and car payment. Beyond the financial disaster, I noticed other worrying signs. Jason was sleeping until noon most days, even when he didn't have late shifts. He'd lost interest in activities he'd previously enjoyed, declining invitations from friends, and spending hours scrolling mindlessly through his phone. His personal hygiene had declined, and he often wore the same clothes for days. These weren't just the behaviors of someone with money problems. They were symptoms of depression. I debated confronting him directly, but worried it would only push him further into shame and isolation. Instead, I decided to take action behind the scenes. Using my professional knowledge of debt management, I contacted each of his creditors. I didn't identify myself as his sister, but as a financial consultant, helping a client organize his debts. I negotiated lower interest rates where possible, arranged for several late fees to be waived as a one-time courtesy, and set up payment plans that would prevent further damage to his credit score. Then, I did something that, in retrospect, may have been either the most generous or the most misguided decision of my life. I began making minimum payments on his accounts from my own savings. I set up automatic transfers from my secondary savings account, carefully tracking each payment in a spreadsheet. The initial outlay was $2,140, just to bring the most critical accounts current and stop the collection calls. Then I established monthly payments totaling about $3,000 across all his debts. This represented nearly a third of my take-home pay, money that had been earmarked for my own investments and future plans. I justified this decision in various ways. I told myself it was a temporary measure until Jason found stable employment. I reasoned that my brother's mental health was more important than my savings rate. I convinced myself that once he was on better financial footing, he could repay me gradually. But there was another motivation I didn't fully acknowledge at the time. I still desperately wanted a healthy relationship with my only sibling. And I thought maybe this act of kindness, even if anonymous, might somehow heal the rift between us. I didn't tell Jason what I'd done. I didn't tell anyone. I watched from across the breakfast table as he received fewer collection calls. Noticing his visible relief when creditors stopped leaving threatening voicemails, the dark circles under his eyes gradually lightened as one source of his stress diminished. I observed all this silently, continuing to set aside my own financial goals to keep his debts at bay. As weeks passed, I felt increasingly conflicted about my secret. On one hand, I was genuinely helping my brother during a difficult time, potentially preventing a bankruptcy that would haunt him for years. On the other hand, I was enabling behaviors that had gotten him into trouble in the first place. I noticed that as the collection calls decreased, his spending didn't. New packages arrived from online shopping. He'd upgraded his phone. He ordered takeout multiple times a week, while my carefully prepared, budget-friendly meals sat uneaten in the refrigerator. At times, I felt a surge of resentment when he'd make offhand comments about my boring financial discipline or obsession with saving, completely unaware that my discipline was now subsidizing his irresponsibility. I would bite my tongue, reminding myself that I had chosen this arrangement, that he hadn't asked for my help. Still, some nights I'd review my spreadsheet of his debts, watching the balances decrease incrementally while my savings did the same, and wonder if I was sacrificing my own financial health out of some misplaced sense of familial obligation. It was a complex emotional tangle. Compassion for his struggles, frustration at his choices, hope that he would improve, and an uncomfortable awareness that I was participating in a dynamic that mirrored our parents' approach, protecting Jason from the natural consequences of his actions. After nearly 10 months of living in my guest room, Jason finally landed a decent job as a regional sales manager for a craft spirits distributor. The position came with a respectable salary, benefits, and even a company car allowance. I was genuinely happy for him, hoping this opportunity would be the fresh start he needed. "This is it, Soph," he told me excitedly after his first week. "These guys actually value my ideas. My boss says I could be running my own territory within a year." I celebrated with him, buying a nice bottle of wine and cooking his favorite pasta dish. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought perhaps things were turning around for both Jason and our relationship. Within a month, Jason had enough saved for a security deposit on a one-bedroom apartment in Bucktown. It wasn't as nice as my place, but it was in a decent building with reasonable rent by Chicago standards. I helped him move, paying for the pizza and beer for his friends, who assisted with carrying furniture. As I handed him a houseplant as a housewarming gift, a peace lily that was supposed to be easy to keep alive, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I would have my space back, but sadness that our brief period of reconnection was ending. "Don't be a stranger," I told him as I left his new place. "Sunday family dinners won't be the same without our pre-game strategy sessions." He laughed and promised to stay in touch, mentioning plans for us to try new restaurants in his neighborhood. Behind his back, I continued making payments on his credit cards and loans. With his improved financial situation, I had hoped to gradually shift the responsibility back to him, but I worried that any sudden change might alert him to my involvement. Instead, I decided to accelerate payments on some accounts to close them entirely, using my year-end bonus to make significant dents in the 2 highest interest cards. My plan was to eventually eliminate all his debt, allowing him to start fresh with his new job, without ever knowing what I'd done. But as Jason's external circumstances improved, I began noticing a troubling shift in his attitude toward me. It started with small comments about my appearance when we met for occasional dinners or at family gatherings. "That's an interesting outfit choice," he'd say with a slight smirk. "Very financial consultant." Or he'd glance around my apartment and remark, "Must be nice having all this space just for yourself." Despite the fact that his new place was only marginally smaller, these comments weren't exactly hostile, but they carried an undercurrent of resentment that confused me. I was genuinely happy for his success, so why did he seem increasingly bitter about mine? The situation worsened when I began dating Michael. 8 months ago, we met at a charity auction where I was volunteering, and he was representing his family's foundation. Michael was kind, thoughtful, and passionate about education reform. He worked as a software engineer for a company that developed learning applications for children with special needs. though his family did indeed come from money. His parents had built a successful real estate development company that Michael had little involvement in. He preferred to make his own way, rather than join the family business. When I introduced Michael to Jason at a casual dinner, I watched my brother's demeanor change instantly. His handshake was a little too firm, his smile didn't reach his eyes, and he immediately began asking pointed questions about Michael's family background and career. "So your parents are in real estate? That must be convenient," Jason said, emphasizing the last word in a way that made me cringe. Michael, to his credit, answered politely, explaining that he had chosen a different path from his parents. Throughout the evening, Jason made several more comments with double meanings. When Michael mentioned his condo downtown, Jason looked at me and said, "Sophia's always had an eye for nice real estate, haven't you, sis?" When the topic of travel came up, and Michael mentioned a recent work trip to Seattle, Jason raised his eyebrows and commented, "Sophia loves men who travel. More freedom that way, right?" By the end of the dinner, I was exhausted from trying to smooth over Jason's remarks, while Michael looked increasingly uncomfortable. In the following weeks, Jason's insinuations about my relationship became more overt, particularly at family gatherings. At a barbecue at our parents' house, he cornered our cousin Andrea near the drink coolers, not realizing I was just around the corner. "Yeah, Sophia's definitely upgraded with this one," I heard him say. "She's been looking for a guy with family money for years. Remember David from college? Dropped him as soon as she found out his parents had remortgaged to pay tuition." I froze, ice cubes melting in my cup, as Andrea laughed uncomfortably. David and I had broken up because he cheated on me with my roommate, a fact my family well knew. At our Aunt Patricia's 70th birthday dinner, Jason waited until Michael stepped away from the table before leaning over to my younger cousins and stage whispering, "You should ask Sophia for dating tips. She finally landed a rich one." When Michael returned, Jason smoothly shifted to discussing baseball, as if nothing had happened, but the damage was done. I watched my cousins exchange glances, and later caught one of them studying my designer watch, a gift I'd bought myself after a significant promotion, but that now looked suspect in light of Jason's comments. The most painful moment came at a casual Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Michael couldn't attend due to a prior commitment, and somehow his absence became the primary topic. "So where's the golden boy tonight?" Jason asked as we set the table. "Family business meeting about the trust fund." I ignored the jab, simply explaining that Michael was helping a friend move. "Interesting," Jason replied. "Didn't think manual labor was in his wheelhouse. Or is that the kind of favor that comes with expectations?" Our mother, overhearing, laughed nervously and said, "Jason, stop teasing your sister." But it wasn't teasing. It was a deliberate attempt to redefine my relationship as transactional, to paint me as calculating, rather than genuinely in love. What made it all so bewildering was that during this same period, I had paid off 2 of Jason's credit cards completely, and was making accelerated payments on a third. Each month, I transferred thousands of dollars toward his debts, while he publicly undermined my character. I told myself that his behavior came from insecurity, that perhaps seeing me happy with Michael triggered his own relationship frustrations. I made excuses for him, just as our parents always had, convincing myself that once he felt more secure in his own life, these attacks would stop. But they didn't stop, they escalated. And as they did, I found myself in the increasingly painful position of defending not just my relationship with Michael, but my entire character and history to people who had known me my entire life, all while continuing to secretly help the very person who was damaging my reputation. The situation took an even darker turn when Jason began involving our extended family in his narrative about me. Our family had always been close-knit, with frequent gatherings for birthdays, holidays, and sometimes just because someone decided to host a backyard barbecue. These events had once been a source of comfort and connection for me, but they gradually transformed into minefields of uncomfortable moments and whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. It started with subtle changes. An aunt asking unusually detailed questions about Michael's career, a cousin making a joke about me winning the lottery with my new relationship, an uncle commenting that I'd really moved up in the world since dating Michael. At first, I tried to laugh these remarks off or change the subject, but they became increasingly frequent and pointed. During our annual Labor Day family picnic at the lakefront, I overheard my mother's sister, Aunt Diane, asking my cousin if Michael's parents knew about my dating history. When I approached to offer her some of the fruit salad I'd brought, she quickly smiled and switched to discussing the weather. Later that same day, I found myself alone with Uncle Robert, my father's brother, who had always been kind to me. "So, this Michael," he began awkwardly. "He seems like a good guy. His family must be comfortable." The pause before comfortable spoke volumes. I assured him that yes, Michael was wonderful, and our relationship was based on mutual respect and shared values. Uncle Robert nodded, but then added, "Just be careful, Sophia. Men from wealthy families sometimes have different expectations. Make sure you're both in it for the right reasons." The implication that I might not be in the relationship for the right reasons stung deeply, especially coming from someone who had known me since childhood. Thanksgiving at my parents' house marked a particularly uncomfortable milestone. I had been dating Michael for about 5 months by then, and he had joined us for the holiday. Throughout the meal, I noticed relatives watching our interactions with unusual interest, as if assessing the authenticity of our relationship. After dinner, while helping with dishes, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Honey," she began hesitantly, "is it true that Michael's family owns property in 3 states?" I was surprised by the question and its timing. "They have some real estate investments." "Yes, why?" She glanced toward the dining room, where Michael was chatting with my father. "No reason. It's just impressive. And you two seem very close already." Something in her tone made me pause. "Mom, what are you actually asking me?" She busied herself rinsing a serving dish. "Nothing, sweetheart. I just want to make sure you're being sensible. Relationships with significant financial differences can be complicated." I felt a chill run through me. "Did Jason say something to you about Michael and me?" She avoided my eyes. "Jason's just concerned about you, that's all. He mentioned that things seem to be moving very quickly, and that Michael's family background might be a factor." Before I could respond, my father entered the kitchen, clapping Michael on the shoulder. "So, Michael," he said with forced joviality, "if the market keeps tanking, I might need to hit you up for a loan." He laughed too loudly at his own joke, while Michael smiled politely, clearly uncomfortable. I watched my boyfriend's face, seeing his growing awareness of the dynamics at play. Throughout this period, I continued making payments on Jason's debts, having now completely paid off 3 of his 6 credit cards and significantly reduced the balances on the others. Each time I received a confirmation email about a successful payment, I felt a complex mix of satisfaction at seeing the numbers decrease and frustration that my financial sacrifice was going unrecognized while my character was being maligned. In April, our cousin Emma's wedding provided the next stage for Jason's campaign. During the reception, I excused myself to use the restroom and encountered Emma's sister, Olivia, in the hallway. She'd had a few glasses of champagne and was more direct than others had been. "I need to ask you something," she said, blocking my path slightly. "Are you and Michael really serious? Or is this more of a strategic thing? Because Jason said—" I cut her off more sharply than I'd intended. "Whatever Jason said is probably not true, Olivia." She looked surprised at my tone. "Hey, no judgment here. Jason just mentioned you've always been ambitious. Said you used to research guys before dating them, check out their family backgrounds and stuff." The sickness I felt in that moment was overwhelming. This wasn't just Jason making snide remarks anymore. He was actively creating a false history for me, inventing calculating behaviors I'd never exhibited. "That's absolutely not true," I said firmly. "I've never researched anyone before dating them, and my relationship with Michael is genuine. Jason shouldn't be spreading lies about me." Olivia raised her hands defensively. "Sorry, just repeating what I heard. It seemed weird to me too, since you've always been so straight up." She moved past me, leaving me standing there, feeling exposed and betrayed. Later that evening, I learned from another cousin that Jason had been explicitly calling me a gold digger behind my back, telling anyone who would listen that my entire relationship with Michael was calculated to access his family's wealth. The irony of this accusation, given that I was a successful financial consultant who had been secretly paying Jason's debts for months, was almost too much to bear. What hurt most was how readily some family members seemed to accept this characterization of me, despite having known me my entire life. These rumors also began affecting my relationship with Michael, though he never directly mentioned the comments. I could see him noticing the strange looks, the awkward questions, the sudden silences when we approached groups of my relatives. After the wedding, as we drove back to the city, he finally brought it up. "I get the feeling some of your family doesn't approve of me," he said carefully. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "It's not you they disapprove of." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Jason has been saying some things, implying that I'm only with you because of your family's money." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "That's ridiculous," he finally said. "Anyone who knows you would understand how absurd that is. You're one of the most financially independent people I've ever met." His support meant everything, but I could tell the situation bothered him. "I'm sorry," I said. "Family dynamics are complicated." He reached over and squeezed my hand. "You don't need to apologize for other people's actions." His understanding only made me feel worse about not being completely honest with him. I hadn't told Michael about paying Jason's debts, partly because it felt like a private family matter, but also because I was increasingly ashamed of enabling someone who was actively trying to damage my reputation. That night, lying awake beside Michael, I confronted an uncomfortable truth. While I had been financially supporting my brother out of some combination of love, duty, and hope for reconciliation, he had been systematically undermining my character and relationships. The imbalance was unsustainable, and something would eventually have to give. The breaking point came during a dinner with Michael's parents at Spiaggia, an upscale Italian restaurant overlooking Michigan Avenue. Robert and Catherine had driven in from Lake Forest to celebrate Michael's promotion at work, and they generously included me in the invitation. I'd met them several times before, and always found them to be warm, unpretentious people. Despite their wealth, they treated me with genuine kindness, showing interest in my career and background without judgment. That evening started beautifully. We were seated at a corner table with stunning views of the city lights. Catherine wore a simple but elegant navy dress with a pearl necklace I later learned had been her mother's. Robert, in a charcoal suit that reminded me of my father's Sunday best, ordered a bottle of champagne to toast Michael's achievement. We clinked glasses, and for a moment, I felt perfectly content, proud of Michael, comfortable with his parents, and grateful to be included in this family celebration. We had just finished our appetizers when Catherine set down her fork and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sophia," she began carefully, "I want you to know that we think you're wonderful. Michael has never been happier, and that's what matters to us." There was something in her tone, a careful qualification, that made my stomach tighten. "Thank you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "That means a lot to me." She glanced at her husband, who nodded slightly, then continued. "We just want you to know that we appreciate that you see more in Michael than his family's resources, that you value him for who he is." The words hung in the air like a cloud of smoke. I felt my face grow hot as I processed what she was saying, and what must have prompted such a statement. Michael looked confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Catherine looked uncomfortable now. "I just wanted to address, well, we received some messages that suggested," she trailed off, clearly regretting having brought it up. Robert cleared his throat. "What Catherine is trying to say is that we got some unsolicited warnings about your relationship. We didn't give them any credence, of course. We can see how happy you two are together." Michael's expression darkened. "Warnings? From whom?" I already knew the answer, but hearing it confirmed was like a physical blow. "Your sister reached out to Alexis," Michael said quietly, referring to his younger sister. "She said she was concerned about you, that you had a pattern of pursuing men with financial means. The restaurant around us continued its elegant hum of conversation and clinking glassware. But I felt suddenly removed from it all, as if underwater. Jason, my own brother, had gone beyond family gossip and actively reached out to Michael's family to poison them against me. I managed to maintain my composure through the remainder of dinner, assuring Catherine and Robert that their son meant everything to me, regardless of his background. They were gracious and apologetic about even mentioning it, clearly embarrassed at having brought up such an awkward topic. Michael was silent, his jaw tight with anger, not directed at me, but at the situation. The drive back to my apartment was quiet, both of us processing what had happened. Once inside, with the door closed behind us, I finally broke down. The tears I'd been holding back all evening came in a flood, and with them, all the hurt, betrayal, and humiliation I'd been suppressing for months. Michael held me as I sobbed, his arms strong and secure around me. How could he do this? I kept asking, my own brother, why does he hate me so much? When I finally calmed enough to speak coherently, Michael told me exactly what Jason had written to his sister. A lengthy message, warning that I had a history of targeting wealthy men, that I'd researched Michael's family before our chance meeting, and that I'd even boasted to Jason about my strategy. All complete fabrications that painted me as calculating and mercenary. No one who knows you would believe this, Michael assured me, wiping tears from my cheeks. Alexis showed me the message because she thought it was bizarre. Not because she believed it, but the damage was done. Jason had crossed a line I never imagined he would cross. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or thoughtless comments. This was a deliberate attempt to sabotage my relationship and reputation with people who might become my future family. That night, after Michael left, with promises to return the next day, I made a decision. I logged into my banking app and canceled all the automatic payments I'd set up for Jason's remaining credit cards and loans. For 8 months, I had been silently supporting him financially, while he actively worked to destroy my happiness. The irony was so painful, it was almost laughable. I had spent over $27,000 helping a brother who despised me enough to reach out to strangers with lies about my character. The next few weeks passed in a fog of hurt and anger. I declined invitations to family events, telling my parents I was busy with work projects. I stopped responding to Jason's occasional texts about trivial matters, unable to engage in false normalcy after what he'd done. Michael was wonderfully supportive, but even his understanding couldn't completely heal the wound of such profound betrayal. I found myself questioning every relationship in my life, wondering if other family members shared Jason's inexplicable animosity toward me. I even briefly considered breaking up with Michael, not because I didn't love him, but to escape the narrative Jason had created around our relationship. The thought that people might forever view us through that distorted lens was almost unbearable. My work suffered as I struggled to focus. I'd stare at spreadsheets without really seeing them, my mind replaying painful moments or imagining confrontations I knew I'd never actually have. I withdrew from friends, too exhausted to explain why I wasn't myself, and unwilling to share the humiliating details of my family situation. At night, I'd lie awake wondering where I'd gone wrong, what I could have done differently to have a normal, loving relationship with my only sibling. I even started seeing a therapist, trying to make sense of the family dynamics that had led us here. Dr. Patel listened patiently as I unraveled the complex history of my relationship with Jason, the different standards our parents had held us to, and my most recent attempts to help him, despite his treatment of me. It sounds like you've been operating from a place of hope, she observed during our third session. Hope that if you just give enough, eventually you'll receive the familial love and recognition you deserve. Her words hit with the force of truth. I had been hoping, desperately, irrationally, that my financial sacrifice would somehow transform my relationship with Jason. That generosity could purchase genuine connection. But all it had done was deplete my savings, while he continued to undermine me at every turn. For the first time, I faced the possibility that the brother I wanted, one who would support me, celebrate my successes, and treat me with basic respect, might not exist. The reality of Jason was very different from my persistent hope. and no amount of money or sacrifice on my part could change that fundamental truth. After nearly 3 weeks of processing my emotions, I found myself reviewing my financial records one evening. I'd been meticulously tracking every payment made toward Jason's debts in a detailed spreadsheet, partly from professional habit and partly to ensure I didn't overextend myself. As I scrolled through the entries, $475 to Capital One on March 15th, $830 to American Express on April 1st, $625 to Discover on April 15th, a realization struck me. I had receipts, not just metaphorical ones, but actual documentation of every dollar I'd spent trying to help my brother while he was actively trying to harm my reputation. The irony was almost poetic. I pulled up my email and found confirmation messages for every payment, along with the correspondence I'd had with various creditors when negotiating lower interest rates and payment plans. I had bank statements showing transfers from my account and even screenshots of the reduced balances on his accounts that I'd taken to track progress. All told, I had paid $27,340 toward Jason's debts over 8 months. Money that had come from my emergency fund, my year-end bonus, and what would have been my vacation budget, and I had proof of every cent. As this realization sank in, I remembered that my mother's 60th birthday was approaching in 2 weeks. My parents had reserved a private room at Gibson's, her favorite steakhouse, and invited all the extended family, including, of course, Jason. It would be the first time I'd see him since discovering his messages to Michael's sister. Initially, I had considered making an excuse to avoid the dinner, unwilling to face Jason or the relatives he'd poisoned against me. But now, looking at the evidence before me, a different idea took shape. What if, instead of hiding from Jason's narrative, I confronted it directly? What if I brought these receipts, literal proof of my character versus his, to the dinner? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I called Michael, who came over immediately. When he heard the tension in my voice, I showed him the records I'd kept and explained my emerging plan. I'm thinking of confronting Jason at Mom's birthday dinner, I said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Not causing a scene exactly, but not letting him continue his lies either. I have all this evidence. Michael studied the spreadsheet on my laptop, his expression thoughtful. This is a lot of money, Sophia. I had no idea you were doing this for him. He looked up at me. Are you sure you want to do this at your mom's birthday? It might be pretty uncomfortable for everyone. It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with myself. I know the timing isn't ideal, I admitted, but I'm tired of hiding and avoiding family events because of Jason's lies. This dinner will have everyone there, all the people he's been telling these stories to. And honestly, if I don't do it when everyone's together, the truth might never fully come out. Some relatives will hear one version, others another. I trailed off, considering. I don't want to ruin Mom's birthday, but I also don't think I can sit through another family event being silently judged based on Jason's fabrications. Michael nodded slowly. I understand, and for what it's worth, I think you deserve to set the record straight. He took my hand. Whatever you decide to do, I'll support you. His unwavering support gave me the courage to move forward with the plan. Over the next week, I carefully prepared my approach. I gathered all the payment confirmations and organized them chronologically. I printed bank statements showing the transfers and collected the correspondence with creditors where I'd negotiated on Jason's behalf. I purchased a leather portfolio to hold all the documents neatly, wanting to appear composed and professional rather than vengeful. I rehearsed what I would say, trying to find words that would convey the truth without seeming petty or victimized. I wanted to come from a place of strength and clarity, not hurt and accusation. After much consideration, I decided I wouldn't mention Jason's messages to Michael's sister unless he forced the issue. That particular betrayal felt too personal, too painful to discuss in front of our extended family. My goal wasn't to humiliate Jason entirely, but to correct the false narrative he'd created about me. The night before the dinner, I was folding laundry when my phone rang. Seeing Jason's name on the screen made my heart race, but I answered with a calm, "Hello." "Hey, Soph," he said casually. as if he hadn't been systematically undermining me for months. Just checking if you're bringing Michael tomorrow night. The familiar nickname, once affectionate, now felt like an affront. Yes, Michael will be there, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. Great! Always good to have the meal ticket around. I closed my eyes, counting silently to 5 before responding. We'll see you tomorrow, Jason. As I ended the call, any lingering doubts about my plan dissolved. The casual cruelty of his comment, the absolute certainty in his voice that he could continue this behavior without consequences. It solidified my resolve. I no longer felt anxious about the confrontation. Instead, I felt a strange calm. For years, I had accepted the family dynamic that cast Jason as the lovable screw-up, and me as the uptight overachiever. I had made excuses for his behavior, covered for his mistakes, and most recently, literally paid for his irresponsibility, all while he actively worked to damage my reputation and relationships. Tomorrow night, that dynamic would finally change, not with shouting or accusations, but with irrefutable evidence of who we both really were. As I finished preparing that night, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Nervousness about the public confrontation, sadness that our relationship had come to this point, but also a growing sense of empowerment. For too long, I had allowed others to define me. Tomorrow, I would reclaim my narrative with proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Whatever happened afterward, at least, the truth would be known. My mother's 60th birthday dinner was scheduled for 7 o'clock on a warm Saturday evening in June. Gibson's Steakhouse had always been her favorite special occasion restaurant, and my father had reserved their elegant private dining room with its rich mahogany paneling and white tablecloths. Michael and I deliberately arrived 15 minutes late, after confirming via text with my father that everyone else had already been seated. I wanted to make a single entrance rather than have awkward pre-dinner mingling time with relatives, who might now view me with suspicion. As we entered the private room, my eyes immediately found Jason, seated near my father at the head of the long table. He looked up as we walked in, and I caught the slight smirk that flickered across his face when he noticed Michael beside me. I wore a simple navy blue dress, professional and understated, with a small pearl necklace that had been my grandmother's. The leather portfolio containing my documentation was tucked discreetly in my handbag. Michael squeezed my hand reassuringly as we made our way around the table, greeting relatives with kisses and hugs. My mother stood to embrace me, looking lovely in a new dress I suspected my father had helped select. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said warmly, genuinely happy to see her, despite my anxiety about what was to come. "You look beautiful." We were seated across from Jason and next to my Aunt Patricia and Uncle David. The first part of the evening progressed normally, with appetizers and wine flowing as family members caught up on each other's lives. I noticed several relatives watching Michael and me with that now familiar speculative interest, but I engaged in conversation normally, determined not to appear defensive or uncomfortable. My cousin Emily asked about work, and I happily described a new project involving sustainable investment strategies. Throughout these exchanges, I could feel Jason's eyes on me, though I carefully avoided direct interaction with him. By the time our main courses arrived, Jason had consumed 3 beers and was becoming increasingly animated. When my father proudly mentioned my recent promotion to senior consultant, Jason interjected loudly, "Must be nice getting paid so much to tell other people what to do with their money." There was an awkward pause as several relatives glanced between us. My father cleared his throat and attempted to change the subject, asking Uncle Robert about his new fishing boat. But Jason wasn't finished. As conversations resumed around the table, he leaned forward, looking directly at me. "Seriously though, Soph, why work so hard when you can just marry rich?" His voice was just loud enough to carry to nearby relatives, who again fell silent. I could see my mother's expression tighten with discomfort. Michael shifted beside me, but I placed a hand on his knee, signaling I would handle this. "What exactly do you mean by that, Jason?" I asked, keeping my voice level and curious, rather than confrontational. He seemed momentarily surprised by my direct question, but recovered quickly. "Oh, come on," he said with a dismissive laugh. "Everyone knows your strategy. You've always gone after guys with money." The table had grown completely quiet now. All pretense of separate conversations, abandoned as relatives, watched our exchange with uncomfortable fascination. My father attempted to intervene. "Jason, this isn't the time or place." "It's okay, Dad," I interrupted gently. "I'd actually like to hear what Jason has to say." I turned back to my brother. "Please continue. I'm interested in hearing your theory about me." Something in my calm demeanor seemed to embolden him. Perhaps he mistook my composure for defeat. Or maybe the alcohol had clouded his judgment. Whatever the reason, Jason proceeded to lay out his narrative in detail, addressing the entire table, now that he had an audience. "Look, I know my sister better than anyone," he began with false sincerity. "Sophia's always been obsessed with status and money. In college, she would literally research guys before dating them, checking out their parents' professions and where they lived. This was a complete fabrication." But I remained silent, letting him continue. "She dropped her college boyfriend the minute she found out his parents weren't actually rich. Then there was that investment banker she dated specifically because he had family connections." Another lie. I dated someone who later became an investment banker, but we'd met in a community volleyball league when he was still in graduate school. "Now we have Michael," Jason continued, gesturing toward my boyfriend with his beer bottle. "No offense, man, but do you really think it's a coincidence she ended up with someone whose family owns half of Chicago's real estate?" Michael remained admirably composed beside me, though I could feel the tension in his body. "So yeah," Jason concluded with a shrug. "I'm just saying what everyone already knows. Sophia's always been good at finding guys with deep pockets. It's like her superpower." He laughed at his own joke, though no one joined him. The silence around the table was thick with discomfort. My mother looked close to tears, while my father appeared torn between anger and embarrassment. Various relatives studied their plates, unsure where to look. This was the moment I had prepared for. With deliberate movements, I reached for my handbag and removed the leather portfolio. "That's an interesting theory, Jason," I said, my voice still calm, but carrying clearly in the silent room. "I have a different perspective I'd like to share." I opened the portfolio and began removing documents, arranging them neatly before me. For the past 8 months, I've been anonymously paying off Jason's credit card debt. I heard several small gasps around the table. Jason's face registered confusion, then alarm. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his confidence wavering for the first time. Instead of answering him directly, I began distributing copies of the payment records I'd prepared. Bank statements showing transfers, confirmation emails from creditors, and a summary spreadsheet detailing every payment. I handed them first to my parents, then passed copies around the table. Jason had accumulated over $40,000 in credit card debt across 6 different cards. I continued, as relatives began examining the documents. When he temporarily lived with me last year, I discovered collection notices and realized he was in serious financial trouble. Rather than embarrass him by confronting him directly, I decided to help by anonymously making payments on his accounts. Jason's face had drained of color as he stared at the papers now circulating among our family members. "These records show that I've paid $27,340 toward Jason's debts since last October," I continued. "I used money from my emergency savings and my year-end bonus to help him avoid bankruptcy and protect his credit score." I turned to face Jason directly now. "I did this while you were telling our family and friends that I was a gold digger. I did this while you were making jokes about me marrying rich at family gatherings. I did this while you were sending messages to Michael's sister, warning her about my supposed history of targeting wealthy men." My voice remained steady, though my hands trembled slightly. "I never intended to tell anyone about helping with your debt. It wasn't about recognition or gratitude. It was simply because you're my brother, and I thought you needed help." I looked around the table at the shocked faces of our family members. "I'm not sharing this now to embarrass Jason. I'm sharing it because I'm tired of having my character questioned based on false stories," I've worked hard for everything I have. I built my career from nothing, saved carefully, and made responsible financial choices. And yes, I fell in love with Michael, who happens to come from a wealthy family. But I fell in love with him because he's kind, intelligent, and supportive. Qualities that have nothing to do with his bank account. The silence that followed was absolute. Jason stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. My mother had tears streaming down her face. My father looked stunned, the documents clutched tightly in his hands. Aunt Patricia was the first to speak, her voice wavering with emotion. Sophia, I don't know what to say. This is extraordinary. Uncle David nodded beside her. We had no idea, sweetheart. Jason abruptly pushed back his chair and stood, swaying slightly. Without a word, he walked out of the private dining room, the door closing quietly behind him. In his absence, the tension in the room seemed to dissipate slightly, replaced by a collective processing of what had just been revealed. My mother reached across the table for my hand. Why didn't you tell us he was in such trouble? We could have helped. I squeezed her fingers gently. I think Jason needed to maintain the appearance that he was doing well. And honestly, I was happy to help him. I just wasn't happy about the stories he was telling about me while I was doing it. The remainder of the dinner passed in a strange, subdued atmosphere. My relatives made efforts to engage in normal conversation, though the shock of the revelation clearly lingered. Several of them approached me privately as the evening progressed, offering apologies for having believed Jason's insinuations. Michael remained steadfastly by my side, his quiet presence a source of strength. As we prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside, his expression grave. I'm sorry, Sophia, he said, his voice rough with emotion. We should have seen what was happening. We should have questioned Jason's comments about you instead of... He trailed off, unable to finish. It's okay, Dad, I replied, meaning it. Family dynamics are complicated. We all played our parts. I hugged him tightly before joining Michael to say our goodbyes. As we walked to our car in the warm summer night, I felt oddly weightless, as if a burden I'd carried for years had finally been set down. Whatever happened next with Jason and my family, at least now the truth was known. The carefully constructed narrative about who I was and what motivated me had been challenged with irrefutable evidence. For the first time in a long time, I felt fully seen by my family, not as the cold, calculating person Jason had described, but as someone who had demonstrated love in the most practical way she knew how, even when that love wasn't reciprocated. The days following my mother's birthday dinner passed in a strange limbo. Jason didn't contact me, and I made no effort to reach out to him. I wasn't certain what might come next. Anger, denial, or perhaps even more elaborate lies to counter the truth I'd revealed. My parents, however, called almost immediately. The morning after the dinner, they invited themselves over to my apartment, arriving with coffee and my mother's homemade cinnamon rolls, a peace offering of sorts. We sat at my small dining table, the sweetness of the pastries contrasting with the difficult conversation we needed to have. We owe you an apology, my father began, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. A big one. We should have shut down Jason's comments about you a long time ago. My mother nodded, her eyes still reddened from crying. I think we've been making excuses for Jason for so long that it became automatic, she admitted. When he said those things about you, we told ourselves he was just teasing, that it wasn't serious. I appreciated their acknowledgement, but needed to address the deeper issue. It wasn't just about not stopping his comments, I said carefully. It was about the double standard. Jason got praised for potential, while I got taken for granted for actual achievements. His mistakes were overlooked, while I was expected to be perfect. My parents exchanged pained glances. You're right, my father acknowledged. We expected more from you because you seemed so capable, but that wasn't fair. We talked for hours that morning, delving into family patterns that had existed since my childhood. It wasn't always comfortable. There were moments of defensiveness, tears, and difficult realizations, but it felt necessary and long overdue. By the time they left, something had shifted between us. I didn't expect immediate or complete change in our family dynamic, but acknowledging the imbalance was an essential first step. My extended family also began reaching out. Aunts, uncles, and cousins, sending messages, expressing their shock over Jason's behavior and their remorse at having believed his insinuations. Some apologized for specific comments or moments when they'd participated in the narrative about me and Michael. Others simply expressed support and love. These messages were healing in their way, though I recognized that family perceptions don't change overnight. True repair would take time and consistent truth-telling on all sides. It was nearly 3 weeks before I heard from Jason. A plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address, but I recognized his handwriting immediately. Inside was a 6-page handwritten letter, uncharacteristic for my technology-dependent brother, and a check for $5,000 with first payment written in the memo line. The letter began with a simple, "I'm sorry," followed by the most honest communication Jason had offered me in years. He wrote about his feelings of inadequacy beside my achievements, how he'd resented my financial stability while he struggled, and how that resentment had gradually transformed into the destructive behavior I'd experienced. He acknowledged that nothing justified his actions, particularly reaching out to Michael's family with fabricated stories. "I told myself I was protecting you," he wrote, "but I knew that wasn't true. I was trying to sabotage your happiness because I couldn't stand that you had everything I wanted: success, stability, and a healthy relationship, while I had failed at all three." Jason explained that after leaving the birthday dinner, he'd spent the night driving aimlessly around the city, eventually ending up at the lakefront where he sat until sunrise, confronting the person he'd become. He'd entered an outpatient therapy program the following Monday, and had begun the difficult process of examining his behavior patterns and taking responsibility for his choices. "I'm not writing this expecting forgiveness," his letter concluded. "What I did doesn't deserve that. I'm writing because you deserve the truth, and because I need to start somewhere if I'm ever going to become someone worthy of being your brother again. The money enclosed is just the beginning of paying you back. I know it's not just about the money, but it's the clearest way I can start making amends." I sat with the letter for several days, unsure how to respond, or if I wanted to respond at all. Part of me feared this was another manipulation, that any reconnection would eventually lead back to the same unhealthy patterns. But another part recognized the courage it must have taken to write such a letter, to face his actions without excuses. Eventually, I called him and suggested meeting at a coffee shop near my office, neutral territory, where we could talk privately, but in public. Seeing Jason again was surreal. He looked different somehow. His usual confident demeanor, replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful presence. We sat across from each other, somewhat awkwardly at first, neither quite knowing how to begin. "I got your letter," I said finally, "and the check. You don't have to pay me back all at once." He shook his head firmly. "Yes, I do. Maybe not financially, but in every other way. What I did was..." He trailed off, searching for words. "Unforgivable is the term that keeps coming to mind." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But I'm still here, still willing to talk. That's something." Our conversation that day wasn't a miraculous healing of all that had been broken between us. It was tentative, sometimes uncomfortable, with long pauses and careful phrasing. But it was honest in a way our interactions hadn't been for years. We agreed to move forward slowly, no pretending the past hadn't happened, but no dwelling exclusively on past hurts either. Jason would continue his therapy, make regular payments toward what he owed me, and most importantly, correct the false narrative he'd created about me with anyone he'd spoken to. I, in turn, would be open to rebuilding our relationship based on truth and mutual respect, rather than the dysfunctional patterns of our past. In the months that followed, our family dynamic underwent a gradual but significant transformation. Our parents, prompted by the dramatic revelation at the birthday dinner, began their own process of examining the roles they'd assigned to Jason and me. Family gatherings became more balanced, with my accomplishments acknowledged as genuinely as Jason's efforts toward change. Michael and I grew even closer through this challenging period. His unwavering support during the confrontation and its aftermath demonstrated a depth of character that confirmed what I'd always known. He was with me for who I was, not what I represented or could provide. 6 months after the dinner, during a weekend trip to Michigan, he proposed on a quiet beach at sunset. The ring he chose was beautiful, but intentionally modest, a reflection of his understanding that for me, value had never been about price tags. When I called my parents with the news, their genuine happiness for us was palpable. There was no undercurrent of speculation about Michael's family wealth, no jokes about landing a rich one, just joy that I had found someone who truly valued and supported me. Jason's journey toward amends continued unevenly but sincerely. He maintained his therapy, found more stable employment, and gradually repaid about half of what I'd spent on his debts. More meaningful than the money was his effort to repair the damage he'd done to my reputation within our family and social circle. He had difficult conversations with relatives and friends, admitting his lies and explaining that they'd been born from his own insecurities, rather than any reality about me. These actions didn't immediately erase the hurt or fully rebuild our trust, but they created a foundation for a new kind of sibling relationship, one based on truth, rather than competition or resentment. Looking back now, I can see that the experience, painful as it was, taught me invaluable lessons about family, forgiveness, and self-worth. I learned that sometimes the most loving action isn't enabling or silent support, but honest confrontation. I discovered that standing in my truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is more powerful than accommodating falsehoods for the sake of peace. Most importantly, I realized that my value isn't determined by my family's perception or anyone else's narrative about me. It comes from within, from my integrity, my actions, and my capacity to love, even when that love isn't perfectly reciprocated. I've come to understand that financial power dynamics affect relationships in complex ways. Money can be used as both weapon and shield. It can express love or exert control. In my case, I'd used my financial resources to help someone who was simultaneously trying to undermine me. The irony of that situation still strikes me sometimes. How I was labeled a gold digger while literally giving away gold. But I don't regret helping Jason, even knowing how he was behaving toward me. That help came from a place of genuine concern. And though the outcome wasn't what I'd hoped for, the action itself reflected my values. What I do regret is not addressing the false narrative sooner, not standing up for my character and relationships before the situation escalated so dramatically. I've learned that allowing lies to go unchallenged doesn't preserve peace. It only allows harmful stories to take root and grow. If you're facing similar family situations, unequal dynamics, false narratives, or the painful gap between hope and reality in your relationships, I hope my story offers some insight or comfort. Family wounds cut deeply because they're inflicted by the people who should love us most. But healing is possible when truth replaces pretense and when healthy boundaries replace enabling behaviors. And sometimes, the most powerful response to those who mischaracterize you isn't defensive explanation or angry confrontation, but simply showing the receipts, literal or metaphorical evidence of who you really are and what you've actually done. In my case, those receipts changed everything. I wonder, have you ever had someone close to you spread false information about your character? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from the experience? I'd love to read your stories in the comments. Sometimes sharing these difficult family situations helps us realize we're not alone in navigating complicated relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey. I hope it reminds you that your worth isn't determined by others' perceptions, and that standing in your truth, even when it's difficult, is always the right path forward. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more reflections on family dynamics, personal growth, and the unexpected lessons life teaches us. Until next time, remember that the most powerful receipts you can show are the consistent evidence of your character, regardless of what others might say about you.